You heretic!
When we talk about Raven Software's developed games, and the usual suspects which come to mind are Heretic, Hexen, Soldier of Fortune, Mage Slayer, a bunch of Star Wars games, and many more. But very often it is overlooked that the original Heretic actually did have a named sequel, Heretic II. Released in 1998 and using the Quake II engine, Heretic II was pretty controversial due to being a big shift away from its predecessors, who were all classical first-person shooters built on the Doom engine. This one, however, was in third person. The gameplay was slowed down, a voice-acted story was introduced, and well, it was no longer a mindless Doom clone shooter with story being the backing track. Speaking of which, as the original Serpent Riders trilogy was concluded with Hexen 2, Heretic 2 instead focuses on the story of the original Heretic's main protagonist, Corvus, and his journey after the events of the Serpent Rider games. Greetings, ladies and gentlemen, this is Calistophiles, and it is my utmost pleasure to welcome you to the world of Heretic 2 and my thoughts upon it. You're about to experience Heretic revelation like no other. Powerful, intense action, divine 3D worlds, almighty weapons and spells, and awe-inspiring third-person gameplay. A true out-of-body experience. Yeah, it sure is. I've always loved the marketing that games had on their physical boxes back in the day. Everything was so over the top and hyped to high heavens in order to make sure that you'd notice their game specifically when browsing through the store aisles, just like we currently have with early access titles. In the case of Heretic 2 though, Raven Software did just deliver on most fronts, and this is probably one of the lesser known but most amazing games from the late 90s. Seeing is believing. Yeah, well, what they managed to do with the Quake II engine is pretty bonkers, and when we lay some modern day enhancements on the game, it still looks absolutely stunning in my opinion. Sure, it's no Crysis or whatnot, but I find Heretic 2's graphics to have aged really well. Underground civilizations to explore. Well, that's a bit of a stretch along with the lush sinking cities to discover, to say the least. But I love it. There's just something about reading this stuff on a physical box which gets me hyped up for the actual game. What we have in the box itself is the obligatory Activision registration card, reminding us the good old days of yesteryear, the game manual called the Journal of Siernan, and of course the CD case. Lovely. And the manual is a pretty important addition to the game, as it contains the lore of the game and various races which inhabit its world. Information on spells, weapons, shrines, and many enemies you will encounter in the game can also be found here. And then there is some simple troubleshooting guides, keyboard shortcuts, legal stuff, and so forth. I truly miss the days gone when we had physical copies of games which came with manuals and fantastic box art. I remember getting Command & Conquer Renegade when I was younger, and before I even tried out the game itself, I spent a whole evening simply drooling over the manual and reading the various info bits on the game's mechanics and lore. It was awesome, and I kind of feel sad for kids nowadays who will never probably have such an experience themselves. At least for older games found on GOG.com, we do get digital versions with scanned-in manuals and so forth, but it's simply not the same anymore. Alas, let's stop drooling over the physical features of this digital marvel and get the game installed, patched up, and modified for a more modern gaming experience. Now, before we get to the actual story and the game itself, I'd like to touch upon a tutorial of this game. Yeah, remember the time when you actually had separate tutorial levels in games? Well, they had to be there, because you knew that on harder difficulty levels, the game would simply hand your ass over to you on a silver platter if you didn't hone your skills enough. Or at the time, they didn't really know how to educate the player base with the game's mechanics any better. Heretic 2 here also goes an extra mile with the tutorial mission by introducing secrets to it. Yeah, secret areas in a tutorial level. Mind-blowing stuff, right? Anyways, I love the fact that they put it in the game. It's just something different that you don't get to see every day. And now let's get on with the game, and of course we are going to start with a hard difficulty, because what could possibly go wrong, right? Well, roll the intro.
Long ago, a darkness fell on the lands of Parthoris. Cities burned and their peoples enslaved. The serpent rider Sparrow reigned supreme, until out of the fires arose a hero, one who would combat the minions and Sparrow himself.
Ever the brave warrior!
Your serpent lies dead. It ends here, Sparrow.
Somnated son. A gallant attempt, but your stand ends here. Curse you, Corvus! I curse you with all the despair of the lost god!
At long last, home. No! No! This isn't right! Damn you, Sparrow! Damn you!
Although the reign of Sparrow was brought to a fiery end, the Serpent Rider had left Corvus cursed to wander the outer worlds, searching for a way home, battling for his very survival. The time has come to return home. The other tomes of power have been opened, and a powerful spell has been cast. The aura will serve as a beacon, allowing me to open a world ripple to our realm.
So many ages. Parthoris was becoming just fragments in my mind.
Corvus, go. Return to your homeland. Our journey is over.
Now you might have noticed that the videos don't exactly look perfect and are, well, besides having blocky seizures of sorts, zoomed in. This is entirely my fault, as I forced a 21:9 aspect ratio on a game which was originally designed for 4:3 resolutions. It is still amazing to see though that the videos get this kind of treatment, as usually I'm simply left with black bars galore on these occasions. Good news is though that the game is absolutely superb in 21:9. The FOV can be altered through the console, and even the FPS limit can be pumped up with the CL_max FPS command. And the graphics, well, just wow. For a 1998 game, this looks absolutely stellar, and just look at the details and the animation work. It all looks bloody fantastic. And well, speaking of graphics, given the game's general dark atmosphere, it looks mind-blowingly awesome on the 48-inch LG C1 OLED screen. But let's talk about the gameplay of Heretic II and what makes it special. As said, Heretic II is a third-person action-adventure game which was a big shift away from general first-person action titles of the 90s. Its controls are super tight, and you will find out rather quickly the things you can and cannot control. When we speak of Corvus's moveset, then at first sight it's all the basic stuff like walk, creep, run, strafe, jump, climb, roll, etc. But what makes it special is Corvus's Durnwood staff, which you might or might not remember from the original Heretic, where it was pretty much useless. Now though, this weapon takes a driver's seat for the whole duration of the game, and the other weapons simply complement Corvus's destructive capabilities. When you have the staff equipped, you gain access to an entirely new moveset and attacks that are not explicitly mentioned anywhere, not even in the manual, or I might just be blind to them, but rather you should experiment around to figure them out yourself. You can pole vault with the staff when running in order to cross huge gaps, do backwards handsprings, powerful downward thrusts with the spear whilst mid-air and more. The depth of this is simply amazing for the game of this age. During my playthrough, I randomly discovered that you can even simply slam the spear into earth by holding down the use button and attacking. I mean, it's completely random and useless, but a nice little quirk to know. In addition to that, about halfway through the game, as I was wondering how to reach a specific platform higher up than what I could reach with simple jumping mechanics, I discovered that Corvus can actually do wall jumping. Yeah, it's not necessary to know that this can be done in the game, and you could definitely complete the whole game without ever using it, but it just shows the depth and love that this game received during its creation. But if it was made with love, then it must be pretty damn good, right? Well, there is one big issue with the game, but we'll come back to that real soon, I promise. With Heretic II being a sequel to the Serpent Rider games, you get the already well-known green and blue mana to use on your spells. However, in this game, they assume a bit different roles than what you might have come to expect. The green mana you will be able to use on offensive spells accessed by the number keys 1 to 9, so the green mana essentially acts as ammo for those spells. Besides the offensive spells and your Durnwood stuff, you also get a couple of additional weapons to play around with, like the Hellstaff, Storm Bow and Phoenix Bow. These special weapons have their own respective ammunition and do not draw from the green offensive mana pool when used. The blue mana you can use on defensive spells like the Tome of Power, Lightning Shield or the almighty Morph Overum, which literally turns your enemies into chickens. In the past games, you had to pick up the defensive spells as items, and they were always a one-time use only. In Heretic II, every defensive spell you gather can be used for an unlimited amount of times, but is restricted to your blue mana pool, forcing you to think carefully which spell would work the best in the given situation, whilst not needlessly wasting precious mana. I think that this was an excellent change which had to be made in order to make sure that people experiment more with different spells and weapon combinations. It also made the game way more fun to play, as the Tome of Power could now be used rather frequently, and giving you access to alternative, more powerful versions of the weapons and spells which you already had acquired. The general variety of weapons and spells available to you is great. They all behave very differently and are very situational, so you're not really stuck using the single best spell available to you, but rather need to think ahead which one would actually be most useful in the given scenario. Throughout my playthrough though, I noticed that there was actually one single spell which I did never use, and to my amusement, it was actually the very last spell you get in the game, the Iron Doom. I don't know, it just felt like it was extremely underpowered for the amount of mana it cost to cast. Sure, the Tome of Power version of the Iron Doom is an absolute nuke, but without the tome's effect it felt rather useless. In addition to mana and weapons, you also get one-time use shrines in the game. When activated, they provide you with a specific buff which can range from full health, full mana, silver armor, golden armor, spear upgrade, temporary light companion, underwater breathing, or reflective armor. All self-explanatory but the last one. That reflective armor I only saw once during my playthrough and is supposed to deflect all incoming projectiles. But okay, so we talk about the weapons and spells, and don't worry, I won't spoil the story for those wishing to go through the game themselves, so please do, it's an excellent game. But it's about time we start digging into some dirt on Heretic II and its biggest flaw, the difficulty. Remember, I started my playthrough on the hard setting called Armageddon. Damn straight it's called Armageddon, because it will lure your ass in, kiss it gently, tickle your balls and then shove a cactus down your a-hole whilst jokingly asking you whether you wanted fries with that. So the first hub world, or an episode as I call it, lies in the city of Silver Spring. As Corvus arrives home after an endless wander in the Nether Realms, everything's turned to shit and someone has released a plague which is taking over the whole continent. In case you're wondering, that's the story of Heretic II in a nutshell. You are drawn into a conflict which you have no intention of taking part of, but must try to seek out help and stop the plague that's trying to take over the continent. It has its moments which I won't spoil, and the story's delivery is excellent for its time, but don't expect it to be the next Game of Thrones or The Witcher game. Now, do you like rats? If you do, then please look away in disgust, as in this game, the best way to kill the annoying rats is simply by walking over them. Finally, a game which understands the basic logic behind stepping on smaller creatures. Needless to say, I was psyched about this feature even back in the day when I first had the chance to play this game. What was I? 14, 15? I don't know. Well, it doesn't matter. Anyways, the gameplay in the first hub world wasn't absolutely stellar, but when I reached the first real boss fight, I was absolutely baffled by the amount of health he had. After a good half an hour of bashing my head against a brick wall, I had a moment of realization that you pretty much have to have full stock of mana and weapon ammo in order to beat bosses in this game. Well, not much to do but to restart the level and learn from my ignorance, as I had used the many save slots that the game provides you with in a very disrespectful manner, and a simple reload wasn't really an option for me. Going through the levels again for the second time, I was wiser, conserving all the precious ammo and mana for the boss fight ahead, and well, yeah, it was a good boss fight. But then we were greeted to the next hub world, and holy moly, the difficulty spike was just unreal. At every corner there were these nimble assholes with explosive crossbows, and Heretic II started showing its true colors of how stingy it could be with providing the player some mana on the hard difficulty mode. You try to conserve as much mana and health as possible, but are put up against piles of very agile enemies, against which you almost absolutely have to use costly spells. So what do? Well, you do what we did in almost every other game back in the day. You harass the ever-living crap out of the save and load features, trying to get the very best outcome for nearly every encounter you have in the game. Is it fun? No, it's not. It's the exact opposite of fun, but it gets us through those tougher sections. At one point, I even started ignoring the enemies altogether whenever I could, simply in order to conserve ammo and health as much as possible, because as I recalled the last hub world's boss fight, I did not wish to find myself again in a position where I would lack the actual firepower to bring the boss down. To my amazement though, the boss fight in this hub world was an absolute breeze, and as long as you had enough firepower to blast it down, you really didn't have to worry about health at all, as the boss literally stood in a single spot waiting to be gunned down. Well, to each their own. But now let's talk about the third hub world and its deceptions. It starts off as a fairly sweet treat to your difficult journey so far. The enemies look reasonable enough and you get this wave of stress relief with the difficulty drop. Don't get used to it though, as soon enough the dial is cranked back to full blast and you'll be cursing and smashing that load button like there's no tomorrow. Too bad that like 90% of my footage from this hub world looks like this, and I won't really torture you with it, but that also means that I really cannot show you the absolute bullshit that this game puts you through. I'll just say as much that there are some enemies in there which will make you curse the day that the developers decided to include them. And whilst we're talking about enemies, fuck the harpies. Do you remember the worst part about the Elder Scrolls 3 Morrowind? I'm willing to bet that you're thinking about cliff racers. Well, harpies in Heretic II are similar to cliff racers, with an exception that they dodge almost all of your attacks with ease. Whoever designed those enemies should not have a future in game development, as these guys are simply annoying beyond belief. But okay, rant over. So eventually I managed to reach the last hub world, which starts off simply by cranking the diarrhea dial through the roof and never letting it go down, not even for a second. The whole complex of Cloud Fortress pretty much consists of the worst enemies constantly being thrown at you in ridiculous amounts. I admit, I was ready to give up at this point and restart the game with the medium difficulty option, but once I tried that and completed the first hub, I realized that the medium option is way too easy. It's like a power trip, like you're a god in comparison to the enemies, and there is also way less enemies in total than what you would get with a hard mode. It simply wasn't rewarding at all. So I returned to my hard mode saved game and, well, pushed onwards. Thank God that there is this part of the Cloud Fortress where you can simply push the enemies down the cliffs. There simply isn't enough mana, ammo nor health to deal with all those enemies, and I shall consider this a valid strategy against the game. It's slow and painful, but worth every penny in the long run, because remember, this level consists of worst of the worst teleporting enemies and big axe brutes who can easily take you down from full health in just a couple of hits. And here I would like to give my warm regards again to AMD's hardware encoder and OBS Studios game capture mode, who managed to work together so miraculously that the last part of my recordings came out corrupted again. Yay! So I guess I won't be spoiling the ending for you, even if I wanted to. But with all that being said, how do I feel about Heretic II after completing it? I think that it was a true gem of its generation. The story was subjectively good for its time and enjoyable even today. Besides the obvious balancing issues with the game's difficulty modes, where hard being absolutely relentless and medium being a walk in the park, the rest of the game is just brilliant. Controls are responsive and tight in all the right ways. Graphics are very impressive for the time, and gameplay is just fun. Very fun. And just like it says down the box, the camera is absolutely marvelous for a 90s third-person action game. Not even once did I notice that it got in the way or behaved any differently than what I had expected. It's just super tight without any mouse smoothing, perfect for the action the game so plentifully provides. It's just one of those games which I would recommend everyone giving a go during our short life on this planet, and I just hope that everyone would eventually get that chance. I'm saying this because as it stands right now, Heretic II is not digitally available from, well, any digital storefront. There is a definite demand for bringing the game onto GOG.com, but it seems that there is a licensing limbo going on, and due to that, I don't expect it to be released digitally anytime soon. Luckily, there are still physical copies of the game floating around eBay for quite a cheap price, and the game's not completely unobtainable. Furthermore, a couple of abandonware sites also host a full ISO for the game. Now, I don't know at the moment whether the game is legally abandonware, but if you don't manage to snag a physical copy, then abandonware sites are also an option. What I know for sure though is that this old classic is definitely something that you should try at least once if you have the opportunity, because given the era that it came from and the quality it received, it's an absolute legend. But you know what else is an absolute legend? You are. I would like to thank you very much for watching, and if you enjoyed this kind of content, you might want to consider subscribing, as the main focus of this channel is still older PC games, and well, as of late, OLED stuff, which I simply cannot get enough of. Alas, enough with the blabbering, and let me wish you a lovely rest of your day, whenever, wherever you are. Bye bye.